is a great honor to have Senator Flake here with us today. And we are going to turn time over to Professor David Magleby of the Department of Political Science, who will introduce Senator Flake.
It's a distinct personal privilege and pleasure for me to be able to introduce Senator Jeffrey Flake, who will deliver this year's G. Homer Durham Lecture. He grew up on his family's cattle ranch in Snowflake, Arizona, a town founded by Mormon pioneers Erastus Snow and William Jordan Flake in 1878. He served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to Zimbabwe and South Africa, which planted in him a lifetime interest in Africa. He received his bachelor's degree in international relations from Brigham Young University and a master's degree in political science. He is a proud alum of BYU's Washington Seminar Program, where he interned in the office of U.S. Senator Dennis DeConcini from Arizona. Interestingly enough, when he was elected to the Senate, he occupied that same seat once held by Senator DeConcini. He served as executive director of the Foundation for Democracy in Namibia and later executive director of the Goldwater Institute in Phoenix. He was elected to the United States House of Representatives in 2000, and he was known as a fiscal hawk, especially targeting budgetary earmarks, and then elected to the United States Senate in 2012. His book, The Conscience of a Conservative, A Rejection of Destructive Politics and a Return to Principle, is mentioned in his bio on your program, and a book worth reading. He is married to Cheryl Bay Flake, and they are the parents of 5 children. Senator Flake has been a friend of BYU in his professional life and in his political life. He always presents to our interns, and in the reviews of those presentations praise him for looking at bigger issues and helping them get the broader perspective. They were always substantive. They touch on important issues. He delivered a Faith in Public Service lecture at the BYU Barlow Center in Washington, D.C., which was remarkable. The G. Homer Durham Lecture recognizes outstanding public service. Past recipients of this honor have exemplified a commitment to public service, and it's our pleasure to honor Senator Flake today as he has exemplified this commitment to public service. Please join me in welcoming Senator Jeffrey Flake.
Sven and David, thank you for the introduction, and thank you so much. It's a wonderful honor to be here today. It's a great honor to be here giving the G. Homer Durham Lecture. Greetings to his family in attendance. Where I come from, the president of Arizona State University, Michael Crow, has gained a deserved reputation as a visionary who's taken ASU to new heights in growth and prestige. But Michael Crow stands on the shoulders of G. Homer Durham, who during his time as president of ASU put his own vision into place by building more than 50 structures on the campus and establishing the colleges of law and fine arts, as well as the graduate school of social work. It was reported in one publication that G. Homer Durham once wanted to be a United States Senator. I'm glad he set his sights higher. Had he been a senator, it is likely that thousands of students would have been denied his tutelage, and members of the church would have missed out on his leadership and his spiritual guidance. He chose well. Cheryl and I cherish our association with BYU that we share with all of you. It was 35 years ago that we met on a beach at BYU, Hawaii. I don't remember much about school on Oahu's North Shore, but I do remember that girl on the beach. Now, several years later, and 3 kids later, we left the cold mainland behind and 3 toddlers behind to go and revisit that spot on the beach. We reminisced, and then we drove up to the school. I mentioned to Cheryl that things had sure changed around there. I said, pointing to a new building, I said, "That's a new building there on the right." She said, "No, that's the library." She said that was here when we were. I must admit it was new to me. I do remember eating a lot of pineapple in the cafeteria, spending an inordinate amount of time on the beach and on the tennis court. I have some vague recollection of a political science course I took, so all was not lost on me, and somehow I made it to Congress. But over the years, I've been frequently asked in settings like this what it's like to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Congress. Now, during my time in the Senate, there were up to 6 members of the church in that body. That's a respectable percentage. I served 12 years in the House before being elected to the Senate, and every 2 years in the House of Representatives, each newly elected member rises together in unison and pledges to uphold and defend the Constitution as they are sworn in. Now in the Senate, only a third of the Senate are elected every 2 years, and so it allows for a little more intimate setting of swearing in. We are each 4 senators at a time escorted to the well of the Senate, where the Vice President, who is the President of the Senate, reads the oath of office and swears us in. We were invited to bring our own family Bibles to hold in our left hand as we raised our right hand, and the rite was performed. As you might have guessed, for my swearing in, I brought a leather-bound quad with the standard works etched on the cover. I wondered what somebody in the Senate chamber might think, or somebody watching C-SPAN, if they saw it, but it passed without notice. I returned to my seat, and just then the next group of newly elected senators passed toward the well. One stopped and said, "Senator Flake, I forgot my Bible. Can I borrow yours?" "Sure," I said. I wondered how long it would take before he looked down and realized that he was holding something a little heavier than the King James Version. I breathed a sigh of relief as he returned to my desk without incident, thanked me, and handed me back the quad. I looked then across the floor of the Senate, and there was Majority Leader Harry Reid, a member of our faith. He was looking at me wearing a big smile. He slowly walked over and said, "Brother Flake, when are you going to inform that good senator that he just swore his oath on the Book of Mormon?" I said, I think I'll wait and see how he votes for a while. Now, when the Senate is in session, we have a weekly prayer breakfast. It's attended by roughly a third of the body, as schedules permit. Each week, a different senator is asked to talk about their faith journey, a sort of seminary devotional without the plate of brownies. The senator who speaks that day is asked to choose the hymn that the members there will sing. And right at the beginning of the talk, we had the hymn. And let me tell you, to join 30 of my Senate colleagues in singing a very amateur rendition of "I Am a Child of God" is an experience I'll never forget. A few weeks later, another member of our faith was asked to choose a hymn. He chose "Have I Done Any Good in the World Today?" I know what you're thinking. For a bunch of politicians in Washington, that's not an easy question to answer truthfully. But I'd like to say a few words today about the state of our union. Now, next week is traditionally the time when the President of the United States is invited by the Speaker of the House to deliver the State of the Union address. As you've heard, that address will likely not happen in the House chamber this year, or at least not next week. I would submit to you that when the President of the United States is not invited by the Speaker of the House to deliver the State of the Union in the House chamber, the state of our union is not good. Our union lacks unity. This is not where we need to be if we're going to maintain the vision of our fathers and to honor those who have kept this union together for more than 200 years. I've always loved the prose and poetry of Abraham Lincoln's speeches. In his very memorable first inaugural address, Lincoln called for us to heed the better angels of our nature. And whenever I think of that phrase, the better angels of our nature, I immediately think of my own childhood. As Dr. Magleby said, growing up, a fifth of 11 children on a ranch in Snowflake, Arizona. As long as I can remember being able to read, there was a 3x5 card on our refrigerator. It was stained with vegetable oil, brownie mix, and cookie dough. It read, "Assume the best, look for the good." There were a lot of things stuck to that refrigerator over the years. Wedding invitations, ribbons from the county fair, respectable report cards, as infrequently as they came, countless sticky notes, reminders of ball games and irrigation turns. All of those things came and went, but that card remained. Assume the best, look for the good. It was a gentle reminder from a very patient mother who was forever trying to coax out the better angels in 11 unruly kids who were predisposed to bicker and to quarrel. Now, speaking of bickering and quarreling, in Washington these days, the better angels have all but been declared non-essential employees. They're furloughed. It's difficult to turn on the television or radio or look at newspapers or social media without being alarmed by the vitriol and cruelty that accompanies virtually any discussion of politics. At least I hope we are still alarmed. I hope we haven't accepted as normal the current state of our politics, but I fear that such acceptance comes closer by the day. In decades past, members of Congress would typically move their families to Washington once they were elected. The children of Republican and Democratic congressmen and women would attend the same schools, play on the same sports teams. Their families would socialize, entertain, and worship together. The pull of partisanship during the weekdays was no match for the friendship that was fostered on the weekends. There's an old saying in politics that you won't question the motives of your colleague when you know the name of his or her children. Such familiarity is now all too rare. Soon after I arrived in Congress in 2001, I proposed an amendment to an appropriation bill to lift the American ban on travel to Cuba. I'd always had this strange notion that if you really want to punish the Castro brothers, just make them deal with spring break once or twice. I'm convinced that before long they would simply wave the white flag. But in any event, my amendment was opposed most strongly by Republicans, particularly Florida-based Republicans who at that time still favored isolating Cuba. One Republican opposing my amendment stood during the debate to say that my motivation to lift the travel ban in Cuba rose from my desire to drink mojitos on the beach there. Now, as soon as my Republican colleague said this, a Democrat, David Obey of Wisconsin, who had served for more than 30 years in Congress, jumped to the microphone and demanded that those words about me drinking mojitos be stricken from the record. Taken down, as they say. Now, when this happens, the debate stops as the clerk reads back through what was said, and then the parliamentarian decides whether it rises to the level of being defamatory. Now, after the words were removed, I walked over to David Obey and thanked him for his kind gesture. I asked him why he, a very senior Republican, who rarely shared my views on appropriation bills, would protect me, a very junior Republican. He responded, "Ah, Flake, I know you're Mormon. I know you don't drink. I was just protecting your honor," he said. Now, sadly, in today's polarized shirts versus skins environment, this inter-party magnanimity is rarely found. If there's a good political fight going on, the inclination is to join in, to pile on, not to break it up. In January of 2011, a few days after Democratic Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was shot and gravely wounded while greeting constituents at a Tucson supermarket, we in the Arizona delegation left an empty seat for her at that year's State of the Union address. That year, the Arizona delegation sat together and made it a point to sit in solidarity rather than divide along party lines as the rest of the chamber typically does during that speech. 1 year later, when Gabby, who was still trying to rehabilitate from her grievous injury, returned to Congress, I sat next to her on the Democratic side of the House chamber during the State of the Union address. During President Obama's applause lines, Gabby wanted to stand up, but was unable to do so on her own. So I helped her up. That left me standing, a lone Republican among a sea of Democrats, cheering Democrats. During and after the president's address, I received furious text messages and emails from partisans who wanted to know why I stood, why I agree with President Obama. They didn't see a kind gesture. They saw someone consorting with the enemy. Much the same happened during the 2016 presidential campaign when Tim Kaine was selected as the vice presidential nominee. Tim and I had entered the Senate together. We obviously disagreed on many things, but I knew him to be smart, hardworking, and patriotic. I knew Tim's son, Nat, was serving our country as a Marine. By way of congratulating Tim on being named to the Democratic ticket, I tweeted a playful jab, trying to count the ways I hate Tim Kaine. I'm drawing a blank. Congrats to a good man and a good friend. Once again, there was unhinged and irrational fury from some on my side of the aisle. At a political gathering not long afterwards, I received a scolding from a diehard Republican who said that I was aiding and abetting the enemy. If you can't say anything bad, don't say. He caught himself before fully reversing the advice I'm sure his mother gave him. But such is the conditioned response of a shattered politics. On a beautiful June morning 18 months ago, I was standing between home plate and first base on a baseball field in Alexandria, Virginia. I had already fielded balls in center field and had taken batting practice a few minutes earlier. I was now just waiting for the last of my Republican colleagues to take their swings at home plate before heading back to Capitol Hill for the more mundane task of legislating. And we heard the first shot ring out. We were confused. We didn't know exactly what it was. We all looked quizzically at each other until, after a few seconds, another volley of gunfire came out, and our third baseman yelled, "Shooter, shooter." The next 10 minutes were an intense blur as the gunman fired nearly 100 rounds at members of Congress and their staff on the field. I remember running and diving into the dugout, cinching another congressman's belt as a tourniquet on the leg of an injured staff member, while still more gunfire raged above and around us. When the shooting finally stopped, I ran out to the field. I used my batting glove to plug the bullet's entry wound into Steve Scalise's hip. Then I used Steve's phone to call his wife, Jennifer, so she wouldn't find out on television that her husband had been shot. But the most enduring memory I have of that morning came as I turned during that first volley of gunfire and ran toward the dugout, watching bullets as they pitched and lifted the gravel in front of me. I remember thinking to myself, why? Why us? How could anyone look out at a bunch of middle-aged men playing baseball and see the enemy? Now, the level of hatred that many Democrats feel for Republicans and many Republicans feel for Democrats is unhealthy not only for Republicans and Democrats that harbor such feelings, but for the country as a whole. As Latter-day Saints, we have examples both old and new for kinder, gentler politics. In the New Testament, Paul gave his convert Titus some advice in dealing with his own local congregation. I think it applies well to politics. Paul said, "Speak no evil of man, to be no brawlers, but gentle, showing all meekness to all men." I am concerned sometimes that the talks I've given in church sometimes seep into my political dialogue. After delivering a speech in October of 2017 when I announced that I would not run for re-election to the Senate, a speech in which I decried the lack of civility in politics, the New York Times ran a lengthy story under the heading, Flake's speech bore marks of Mormon faith, not just politics. In an article, a professor of religion said that the speech reminded him, quote, of the cadence, tone, and themes that Mormon leaders often use when addressing the church's vast general conference meetings in Salt Lake City, calling on members to refuse to accommodate the immorality in the larger world. I took that as a compliment. Although I'm sometimes worried when I conduct church meetings that I might be caught saying, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from the Elders' Quorum. Now, to continue with the theme of church and state, my favorite chapters in the Book of Mormon chronicle the exchange of letters between Captain Moroni and Pahoran, the governor of the land. Moroni excoriated Pahoran for failing to provide for his army, saying, we desire to know the cause of this exceeding great neglect. Yea, we desire to know the cause of your thoughtless state. Can you think to sit on your thrones in a state of thoughtless stupor? Let me just say, some days in my office, this type of correspondence would be considered fan mail. But we find out later, of course, that Captain Moroni, who was a good and righteous man, was nevertheless acting on bad information. Pahoran had been besieged by enemies and was in no position to help. Now, Pahoran could have responded in anger. He certainly would have felt justified in returning a vitriolic volley toward Moroni, but he listened to his better angels. He answered Moroni, and now in your epistle you have censured me, but it mattereth not. I am not angry, but do rejoice in the greatness of your heart. How different would Washington be if we were to respond in a similar fashion? Can you imagine Mitch McConnell saying to Chuck Schumer, Chuck, I know you called me a nitwit, but you meant well. I rejoice in the greatness of your heart. Now let's sit down together and find a way to reopen the government. It's probably not going to happen, but a guy can dream. But as I see it, the only real alternative we have to getting along with each other is to be completely alone. Let me tell you, I've tested that alternative, and it's no picnic. Several years ago, I clicked on Google Earth and located a bunch of small inhabited islands in the Central Pacific. Determined to live out a strange dream I'd had since childhood, and after reading countless books about sailing adventures gone bad, I decided to maroon myself on one of these remote Pacific islands for a week with no food or water and with minimal tools just to see if I could survive. I'm not kidding here. Just to give you an idea of how alone I was, after the first few days on the island, I picked up one of the hermit crabs that wandered endlessly through my camp. And with a Sharpie pen that inexplicably made it into my meager survival kit, I wrote number 1 on his shell. I wanted to know if he would reoccur. A while later, I picked up another hermit crab and wrote number 2 on his shell. By the end of the week, I had 126 numbered friends. I grew quite fond of number 72. I often shared coconut scraps with him. I'm not so fond of 47, who pinched my toe. But they say that no man is an island. That I can confirm. When I find it difficult to be civil or to be decent with those with whom I disagree, if I'm inclined to ignore the better angels of my nature, I think back on the lonely alternative. Now, as an aside, I've returned twice to those lonely islands. First with my 2 youngest teenage boys, teenage at that time, one of whom is Tanner, who delivered the invocation. And then, in a bipartisan gesture a few years later, I went back with the New Mexico senator, Democratic Senator Martin Heinrich. We survived for a week with only one tool of survival between us, a machete. Dangerous, I know. Upon returning to civilization, late-night comic Stephen Colbert commented, Flake and Heinrich proved once and for all that Republicans and Democrats can get along when death is the only option. So for what it's worth, it's been empirically proven. So The temptation to return verbal fire after we have been publicly insulted is sometimes overwhelming. Just a few weeks ago, a newly elected Democrat to the House of Representatives publicly used very vulgar language in calling for the president to be impeached. Since I have been critical of the president's similar use of language over the past 2 years, I tweeted the following, quote, "There should be no place in politics for language like this. Pointing out that the president also speaks crudely is no excuse. We should be better." Over the next couple of days, more than 30,000 people commented on my post. The overwhelming sentiment, if the president speaks this way, so must we. We should ask ourselves, where does this escalation lead? What kind of example do we set for our kids? And as elected officials, how do we govern if we treat each other this way? Now, every so often, we see a glimmer of hope. During a contentious party line vote during the confirmation process for the Secretary of State nominee last year, one Republican member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Johnny Isaacson, was in Georgia delivering the eulogy for his best friend at his best friend's funeral. Now, given the narrow margin, Senator Isaacson's absence meant that the confirmation would be doomed until a Democrat, Chris Coons, stepped forward and agreed to pair his vote with the absent Republican colleague, thus allowing the nomination to proceed. Once commonplace, the practice of pairing or voting the opposite way to help an absent colleague has all but disappeared in this hyper-partisan environment. After the vote was called and the confirmation proceeded, the Republican committee chairman, Bob Corker, choked up as he spoke to the media about this magnanimous gesture by Senator Coons. Oh, and I should say that Senator Martin Heinrich, the Democratic senator from New Mexico, with whom I survived a week on the island, just 2 weeks ago, Martin asked me to escort him to the well of the Senate chamber, where he was sworn in for a second term. He did ask me, however, to leave the machete behind. Now, this fervor of rancor and discord will eventually break. That is my hope, and that is my belief. We will return to ourselves once more. The sooner the better, because to have a healthy government, we must have healthy and functioning parties. Two parties that understand that compromise is essential. Two parties that respect each other in an atmosphere of shared facts and shared values, in comity and good faith. And who better to help break this fever than those in this room and those representing this institution? Those of us who teach that we are all children of God and who understand the inherent worth and divine appointment of every soul. Let us, all of us, elevate our discourse and not succumb to the extreme partisanship that teaches that our political opponents are our enemies. Abraham Lincoln said it best, and I'll close where I began with his admonition. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will again swell when touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. Thanks for inviting me again to be here today, and it's an honor to be with all of you. Thank you.
We have some time for questions and answers, and Senator Flake has graciously agreed to take some of your questions. We do not have a roving mic, so if you could raise your hand, I'll call on you. If you could stand up and speak loudly, we'll appreciate that. Yes, Randy.
Senator Flake, what are your plans for proceeding forward
The question was, what do I plan to do after? Well, now. It's been 3 weeks now, and it's been a little enjoyable. I woke up 2 Wednesdays ago next to my wife. I thought, this haven't happened on many Wednesdays over the past 18 years. So I will enjoy, although our youngest is on a mission in Mexico right now, and so we're finally empty nesters. Cheryl reminds me often that we did all this completely backwards. We were supposed to get into politics after the kids were raised. As soon as they're raised, I retire. So, but I do plan to continue to speak out, particularly on some of these issues we talked about today. We cannot go on this way. We cannot govern. Anger and resentment are not a governing philosophy. And as a Republican, I'm very concerned about where our party is going. And I plan to speak out quite a bit on that. I will be announcing next week, so no, I'm not announcing anything. Announcing that I'll be working with a media organization on some things, and I'll be doing some teaching throughout the year, and a number of other things, but I will continue to speak out on this. With regard to Africa, I plan to be active, very active. I did my mission there. Our son Tanner served his mission in Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, and we were over there a couple of months ago picking him up, and I was able to go to Zimbabwe and watch them have elections. First real election since Robert Mugabe had come to power 37 years before. And so I do plan to be involved in Africa however I can.
Yes, over here.
First of all, thank you for speaking today. What kind of, or let me rephrase this, what is the structural change in the government that you'd like to see happen? An example I'm thinking of is term limits for representatives and senators.
Okay, thanks. I'm not a fan of term limits. I think the Constitution does stipulate that you'd have to have a constitutional amendment to overturn it, and that's not likely to happen. In the Senate, we've had considerable turnover over the past several years. Half of the Senate, the members of the Senate, are serving in their first 8 years. And that's a good thing overall, to have a lot of turnover, but there's also a downside. More than half of the Senate has never served in a body during a legislative body that has had regular order. I served in the House beforehand and gratefully was able to experience it there. But in the Senate, we haven't experienced anything approximating regular order, where bills move through the process as they should, where we don't have government shutdowns or operate under continuing resolutions. And so there is value in having members who have been there longer. I'm glad for every minute that John McCain spent in the United States Senate, some 34 years or so, and Orrin Hatch and others. And so I don't think that we've had quite a bit of turnover. I'd rather see that. One thing that has been put out that a lot of people on my side of the aisle are agitating for is to get rid of the filibuster in the Senate. That's, this filibuster is blamed for a lot of things. What the filibuster really is it forces, or the supermajority requirement in the Senate, it forces the parties to work together. And that's a good thing. And if you were to get rid of the filibuster and the House or the Senate became like the House, where majority rules on everything, then you would have the government lurching forward on issue after issue that the Senate, as Washington saw it, was to be the saucer that cooled milk and to cool down the passions of the House. So I hope that doesn't happen. I don't think what we have in the Senate or in the Congress is a problem of the rules. I think it's a problem of behavior. And the media environment that we're in puts all the incentives kind of in the wrong way. I'm talking media, both cable shows and social media in particular. There is very little incentive for deliberation. In fact, the incentive, if you're a senator, like I was, is on any big issue that comes up to quickly declare where you are and to stay there. and to never indicate that a hearing that you might be chairing or an investigation that might be occurring might inform your vote. Because if you do, you've angered both sides. And that's not a place you want to be in terms of death threats and everything else. And so the incentives all push members to the extremes. And so on any big issue, it's very rare to see more than a few members up for grabs or who are deliberating on a topic. So, but I think that's a problem of behavior, not the rules.
Since you're an advocate of cooperating between parties and you're against polarization, why did you not want to go for re-election, especially when the Republicans and the Democrats are so unwilling to work together, but you're against this polarization?
Thank you. That's a great question. I've asked that a lot. In this environment today, it's tough for a Republican like me in a party like this right now. I've had disagreements with the president on policy issues and obviously on behavior and in the way he's held the office. That being the case, it is not possible to win a Republican primary in Arizona. We came down with the realization that in order to win a primary in Arizona or to even be competitive, I would have to adopt some positions that I just can't adopt and condone behavior that I couldn't condone. And in the end, I would have had to stand on the campaign stage with the president as people were chanting, "Lock her up," and whatever else, and I just determined I couldn't do that. Not every state is like Arizona, and I'm not casting aspersions on any other member, but that was the reality for me. Yes?
You talked a lot about like rhetoric of the Republican Party and how that has gone, or both parties, I guess. But I wonder if you could talk about what you think moving forward, if we're going to move away from where the Republican Party has gone policy-wise. What are policies that a Republican Party moving forward should stand on?
All right. I don't want to make this partisan event or anything, but as a Republican, the main tenets that have animated the party, the principles for generations, have been limited government, economic freedom, free trade, strong American leadership around the globe. And those, we've departed quite a ways from there. On trade, for example, that's one area where we're going to have to, as Republicans, lead. That's traditionally been our party's role, to lead on trade. If we aren't actively signing free trade agreements, both bilateral and multilateral, we're being left behind. And I'm very concerned about where we are. The lack of American leadership around the globe and the party's penchant now for withdrawing rather than asserting example, at least, or leadership, has real consequences. I've chaired the Africa subcommittee in the Senate for the past several years. And you have 54 countries in Africa, many of whom are going through transitions. The United States has always been the beacon, our Constitution, the model that they wanted to follow. There were no other viable models. Now there are no other good models, but there are viable models for those countries to follow. And so this lack of leadership that we have right now, and the way sometimes the administration has not only withdrawn, but has ridiculed some of these countries and has made statements that make it very difficult for them to be aligned with us. Those have real consequences long term. So I think those things we're really going to have to turn on. And also our debt and deficit is a problem that the president has been unwilling to address, and the Congress has been all too willing to ignore. And if we continue to do so, then we're going to guarantee that our place in the world is going to be diminished significantly. So, right here.
As a senator, what is your opinion on third-party payments?
My opinion of third party or independent candidates, that's great. We in this country, though, have somehow assigned ourselves two parties. And it'll be a while before there are significant challenges. In presidential race, if Michael Bloomberg, who's worth, I think, $52 billion, can't find a way to a path as an independent candidate for president, there probably isn't one right now. Increasingly, though, we have some states with more of a tradition and history of electing third-party candidates. Maine with an independent senator, although they tend to lean toward one party or another. I do think that in the near future, you'll have more states who will have independent statewide candidates for the Senate and more independent candidates in the House of Representatives as well. So I'm all for it. I think it would be healthy, although this system, this two-party system has worked well, but it only works well if you have two responsible, rational parties that don't see each other as the enemy. And that's a little difficult to get by right now. So, yes?
So, I was on my mission from 2016 to 2018, and I missed a lot of the things that happened politically in between. But I noticed that when I came back, that there was a lot of things that I missed and that I heard about on my mission, like political activists. The Me Too movement was really big in the States when I got back. And I was just wondering, with all the frustration and anger that we see in a lot of these political activist movements, what are ways that we can be politically active as members of our community and to speak out on issues that we want to discuss in ways that are beneficial and that don't give off all that anger?
Well, great. Well, church leaders obviously have encouraged us to support good candidates and to run for office if it works for us as well. So I hope that people will, there are many, many more opportunities these days than there were in the past in terms of getting involved with specific campaigns of candidates that you support in either party, or to advocate on issues. It's far easier to organize, and people who are confined to their house can still be involved on social media. I hope that to the extent that we use those type of mediums, we do so in a way that elevates the discussion rather than denigrates it. And it's tough to read. You want to be entertained, read the mean tweets every once in a while that come through. It's not as entertaining to Cheryl, I can tell you that. But those avenues are available. But boy, we need more people who will actually elevate the discussion there. And like I said, running for office, it's a daunting task right now, given the money that you have to raise and what you subject yourself and your family to. But I hope that people will still do it. And I hope that when people do it, that they will receive support, particularly those who are doing it in the right fashion. Thank you. Where's the back?
Hi, Senator Flake. So this might not be a topic you're comfortable talking about, but recently you were kind of in the middle of the Brett Kavanaugh's case and you were criticizing both sides of the aisle for that issue. Any lessons learned for how we can kind of reach over party lines and mitigate criticisms and bring the community together? Any lessons learned from that case you like to share?
I hope we have, but I'm sure we haven't. And I worry about the next one, the next nomination to come. We, for one thing, with the Supreme Court picks, the Congress, having failed to do its job largely over the years, vests too much authority and too much hope in the Supreme Court to solve our problems that should be solved in the legislative body. So that's the first thing that we should do. But in terms of working across party lines on this, it is a real shame that we have come to where we are in the Senate. And just a few years ago, no matter how polarizing some of these candidates were, or nominees were, still not one senator stood up to require 60 votes. It would always allow it to get to the floor, so there's always been cooperation at least. That's kind of gone now, and I think it probably won't come back for a while, but it shouldn't stop individual members from at the very beginning saying, I have an open mind here, and I will make my decision based on the hearings that we have, the background investigations that go on, instead of simply picking a side from the very beginning. I mentioned the difficulty, the pitfalls for members of Congress that do that, but it needs to be done. All I can say is we've got to encourage. The truth is, members of Congress will only have policies and exhibit behavior to govern when the elected, or when voters value that in a representative. And as long as members are responding to the electorate that demands or wants vitriolic behavior or hate speech, then they're going to get it. So really, as voters and as constituents, make it known that you value people who can govern, who actually will be civil in office.
Just one more question, the lady in the back there.
Actually, going off of that one, you mentioned crossing party lines for personal crises, which I admire and think is very important. You also discussed the need to be morally better than Trump. Considering both of those points, which I agree with, why didn't you build on those personal relationships in the Senate and also cross party lines while voting? And specifically, why did you feel morally comfortable supporting Brett Kavanaugh when his hearing clearly showed that he was not capable of being impartial as a judge?
Well, on the last one, when you look at his Brett Kavanaugh's record on the court, we have a 10-year record on the D.C. Circuit Court, where he and Merrick Garland, the last nominee from our previous president, voted together 93% of the time. On one of the cases that we dealt with during the hearing, the Amnon case, his position was contrary to President Bush, who nominated him to the Circuit Court. And the first decision that has come down so far, or the first indication as far as what the court will take up, his position was contrary to this president's position. So I'm not sure that I agree with the premise of that question, but I hope that we can have a better, and my goal during the time of the Kavanaugh hearing was to do due diligence. I thought there was no reason why we couldn't have an FBI investigation, that the country would feel better and the Senate would feel better about where we were. And I think that is the case. I wish the country could have read the background report that the FBI did. I would have liked it to have started earlier and been more thorough, but I wish the country could have read it. I think people would feel better about where we landed on that subject. But in terms of voting with the president, I'm a conservative. Often on things where the president has indicated a preference as to where the Republicans in the Congress have been, but it's not that I'm siding with the president. I'm siding with a position that I've previously held. But I didn't always agree with the president as I voted, and certainly as he spoke. And I have the welts to prove it on that, or voting against my colleague. Right during the last month, for example, I felt that we needed to protect the special counsel to make sure that his work was done. And I am in favor of certainly confirming judges. We've confirmed 50 of them since we passed a bill in the committee to actually protect the special counsel. But I said during the last 2 months that I would only vote to confirm more judges I would not vote to confirm more until we had brought the bill to the floor to protect the special counsel. That was not a popular position among my party, not a popular position with the president, but I felt it was important, and so I stuck to it. And I do think that we will get that bill on the floor in this new Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.